So, when I first started getting interested in this thing, I thought, I know a bunch of people who are interested in the trigram and the bagua for a variety of different reasons. I was studying Taiji Chuan. I had friends who were interested in yijing and just Taoism in general. So I knew a bunch of people in Taiji Qigong world, and I thought surely these people would be interested in some of these ideas. And it really amazed me that basically no one was interested. Almost no one would talk to me about it. I had one old friend who was really the guy who introduced me to Taoism and is really into yijing, and he at least listened to what I was saying and he thought it was very interesting, but he wasn't really interested in discussing it. I found that perplexing. I couldn't understand it. And when I decided to start making videos about this subject, and clearly some people are interested in it, but now I'm starting to hear from some of the people who are more into the traditional way of viewing things, and some of them really have a problem with what I'm saying. They just don't like it. That's okay. I don't really have a problem with that. It's just that I don't find the argument that interesting, because fundamentally, I'm searching for something that works for me. So when I was studying Taiji Chuan, there's a lot of different ideas about how to practice Taiji, and I'm not a Taiji master, but I would listen to the things that made sense to me, and I would practice, and I would figure out whether or not it worked. Because that's the wonderful thing about Taiji. You practice, and you figure out inside your body what's going on, and then if you do push hands, you get even another level of an opportunity to see, well, do I have the right idea? Am I practicing the right techniques? Does this make sense? And so that's kind of the way I approach this as well. Like, am I getting something out of it? And quite often in the past, before I came up with this idea, I just was very confused. When, for some reason, my dad handed me a copy of the I Ching at one point on my birthday. It was completely out of the blue. He never gave me anything like that before or after. And I was really amazed, and I thought, this is an incredible book. I'd never really looked at it before. And I couldn't really understand it at all. It made no sense to me. But I thought, there's something here. There's something very interesting here. I just can't understand it. And I felt the same way when I was in Master Yu's class studying Taiji Chuan. He would put up the prenatal bagua arrangement and associate the 8 techniques of Taiji Chuan with each of them. And I would ask, well, why is ward off associated with heaven? Why is rollback associated with earth? Why is press associated with water? Why is push associated with fire? But even more specifically, I just was like, well, this is a very particular figure. It's got yin and yang in certain positions. What are those positions, and why does that particular configuration mean this? I think of it as a formal question. I think of it as a challenge to try to understand. So I came up with this idea. Eventually, after a very long time of thinking about it, and I think it's relatively consistent, not only in terms of a way of poetically describing what each of these figures means, but also it's consistent within the tradition. It's consistent within the broad tradition of the axial age, where we had a way of thinking about spiritual states of being, and a way of thinking about what materialism was. But like I said, I don't really have an interest in arguing about this. I just find this to be an interesting way of looking at it. And I'm totally fine with, there are all kinds of traditional ways of looking at it. This is not one. I'm sort of basically saying, hey, isn't this an interesting way of looking at it? And if people find it interesting, great. And if not, but some people get offended. So what I'm wondering is, maybe there's a solution to this. Maybe the solution is, well, I'll just do a different representational thing. I say, okay, this is inspired by the trigrams and the bagua. It's basically the same thing. It's a different representational thing, so it doesn't have that affiliation. I mean, hopefully people wouldn't feel like I'm treading on anything, but people might accuse me of stealing something then, of course, right? But in some ways, what I'm presenting right now is, does this work better for people? Is it more helpful if I dispense with the traditional way of symbolizing these things? I mean, there's a couple of nice things about having it symbolized this way. For one thing, it's easier to see which direction the symbols are heading. So if we have the so-called bottom line, really now is sort of this inner circle, let's say. The inner circle of imagination. Here on the inside of this mind frame, right? That is easier to read, right? And if the kind of imagination is outward and the material minded is characterized by this kind of memory thing in the center, there's something quite elegant about that way of viewing it, right? So I don't need to get too elaborate about this. I mean, I have taken the time to spell it out a little bit more. I don't know if I should bother going around this. I mean, it's just a different way of saying it. Instead of having the names of the trigrams, I can come up with other names that say what I think it means, so that this is the system I'm working with, because I find it to be of utility. Because I've discovered that if you work with this empty receptivity as the base of being, then you're freed from the suffering of the karma of your own actions. Whereas if sensory experience is what you're after, and you're continually worshiping images and chasing after desires and running away from fears, well, then this is the kind of suffering that ends up happening over and over. So it's useful, and I notice it because I know what this is like. You know, I'm probably not the most indulgent person in the world, but I'm certainly not the most disciplined person in the world. So I know what it's like to suffer from drinking too much. Drinking too much coffee is one of the worst things, probably for me. But, you know, drinking too much alcohol, you name it. There's all kinds of different things that we can get attached to. Food, right? Sugar, drugs, all the very, watching too much crap on television, same thing with the internet, right? All that stuff is sense indulgence, right? Running after some sort of an image. I don't know if these are the right terms for what happens in the cycle going around and around here, but you know, it fits, and I thought I would try and find some ways of describing it that were not the names of the trigrams. And I've definitely come to believe from practice that this is the solution to the problem that we find ourselves within in a materialist world, materialist society, where that kind of suffering is continually happening. Now, does it solve all of our problems? Of course not. But it solves the spiritual problem. It solves the essence of our being problem. It doesn't mean that life is all of a sudden going to be awesome. It just means that we have an anchor. We have a way of coping with things. We have a kind of a truth inside of us that we can cultivate. And we're able to, I think, deal with stuff with greater equanimity, greater balance, greater poise. Now, it's so easy to fall off the bandwagon and end up back in this material mind frame. But nevertheless, you know, for me, this has turned into a relatively serious aspect of my day-to-day pursuit. It's something that I don't only present here online, but it's something that I'm attempting to practice and attempting to adjust in my own life so I can see the degree to which it works, and I can make adjustments and better understand what it is that I'm doing. So, you know, maybe there's something that I've lost from the tradition by focusing on this particular thing, but so far I haven't been able to find a way of getting this to work in a way. I mean, there's a great mystery there still, right? If I decide, for example, to consult the yijing, which I occasionally do, although I'm very cautious about it, really. I think it has to be treated with great respect and care, and you can't just buy into it. You have to be really flexible in your thinking and not get too attached to any particular thing. It's like sort of throwing the dice and opening up the realm of possibility so you get a new view of things. And I think there's a tendency to try to find like that there is some sort of fixed truth in a hexagram or something like that. And that's a temptation I try to avoid, where it's going to pass judgment or not. For example, it'll say, well, it is not good to cross the Great River. Something along those lines. That's, it's passing judgment, or the ridgepole will not hold. Any of the various common phrases that are kind of either positive or negative in leaning, So because I don't understand it, I have to be very careful with it. But I do take into consideration whatever it's offering, just like I do when I'm listening to what people have to say about anything. The temptation is to want to reject things out of hand or to accept things out of hand. If you respect what someone is representing, then you might be more inclined to just believe anything they say. And if you don't respect them, then you might be more inclined to reject anything they say. And I do have a lot of respect for this tradition. But I don't understand it. I don't come from it. And I know that it's got a lot of different schools of thought within it. And so there's various points of contention all along the way. And that some of the basic concepts within Taoism have to do with not knowing. So, okay, I don't understand it. So would it make everyone happier if I just stick with this? Curious to know. I like the way this looks. It feels a little more inviting. I don't know if I'm going to make all the videos about this now. Probably not. I'll probably continue because there's a bunch of things that have to do with the poetry of the trigrams and the way that it's set up that I still find very interesting and that I think build the case for this way of looking at it. But again, it's just one way of looking at it. So I hope that those of you who have had some beef with the way that I'm presenting things will weigh in on this. Let me know whether you think that this is a good way forward or not, and I will take it into consideration, although I will not make a decision based upon what anyone says. I can only go by the weighing out that happens within my own consciousness. And ultimately, I try to be as unattached to this as possible. I just find it to be it's so far it's fulfilling the goal that I've been looking for more than anything else I've been able to find. And if something else comes along that fits the bill greater, well, then this will become irrelevant. I mean, ultimately, I came from a very confused state of mind. And so what I wanted to do was to find a way to be less confused. So obviously, if there's something that's inherently confusing, that's not going to do the trick for me. I wanted to find a basic set of principles so I could get some orientation in this world. Because I found myself in a situation where I couldn't make sense out of anything, and everything seemed to be just fraught with misrepresentation, with lies, with dissembling. And this includes many of the things that I had admired at one point early on in life and that I thought were probably true. And over the course of time, I came to realize that, well, no, there's really not any truth there. There's just some nice statements being made, and there's a certain amount of fanfare about it and a little bit of pizzazz, like a little bit of style that kind of goes, it's got a groove to it, you could say, right? It's got a feel. It's emotionally evocative, but it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't help me understand where I am and what's going on. So I wanted to come up with like the most basic principles that I could. And the first thing that really occurred to me was just how beautiful yin and yang were. When I finally got some kind of a sense of what was meant by yin and yang, it's like, wow, that is so elemental. It's such an elegant way of talking about such a wide variety of phenomena. I was very excited about that. But then the question was, well, okay, this is about yin and yang, right? But what? So I found my way towards what I think is a coherent way of looking at it, and I'm sticking with that. So let me know if you find this any more convincing. If you think this is a worthwhile endeavor and you're getting something from it, I would appreciate whatever it is you can do to assist this channel. Subscribe, write a comment, you can share, you can check out the Assembly of Silence Radio Hour, which is my podcast, and sign up there. Maybe most importantly right now, you could sign up on my Substack. You can sign up for free. You don't have to pay the subscription cost. But if I'm going to put a lot of energy into this type of stuff, and if the platforms that I'm working on are hostile to certain ideas that they don't like, the plug could get pulled at any moment. So it would be great to be able to stay in touch with the people who really care about this thing. So if you send me your email, hopefully they won't shut down the email servers, right? And something could continue to be developed. But, some of the things that I say on the podcast and some of the things that I say on this channel are probably things that someone somewhere will have a problem with at some point. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the channel gets pulled at some point or another. So that's all I've got for you right now. I hope you found it interesting. Until next time, adios.